So I'll sing this song for you. Nobody's trying to understand it. Make a noise and make it clear. We're not gonna sit in silence. We're not gonna live in fear.
Scott Dochterman, Chad Leistikow, together on one pod, talking odds and all things Big Ten. Powered by GameDay Men's Health, with locations in Ankeny, West Des Moines, and North Liberty. From the Channel Seed Studios, this is Legends and Listeners, exclusively on Iowa Everywhere.
Man, I love that intro. It gets me fired up. Hey, Hawkeye fans, Big Ten fans, and Iowans everywhere. Welcome to your favorite podcast, Legends and Listeners, here on the Iowa Everywhere Network. As always, we are coming to you from the Channel Seed Studios. My name is Chad Leistikow, sports columnist for the Des Moines Register, joined by Scott Dochterman, national columnist for The Athletic, I'm going to say, or at least Big Ten columnist. I don't know what you want to call yourself, Scott. What's your title?
I'm officially a national reporter now. So
there you go.
With a Big Ten emphasis.
There you go. And that's our show. So it's perfect. And Scott, today we are going to actually dig into a Big Ten topic right out of the gate. But most of today's show will be a little bit more big picture, a little bit more off the grid. It's a chance to field some listener questions, maybe go down some roads we wouldn't normally go down in our relentless news cycle that dominates our respective calendars. But Scott, you had a great idea to start off with a topic that sort of came up with, I think it was with Hassel and Williams, or it was just Hassel, about protected rivalries. So I'll let you take it from here, and then I'll kind of weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a fascinating discussion how the Big Ten arrived at its position of protecting certain rivalries and not others. It's a what they call Flex Protect Plus, which means that there's not just a set limit. It depends on the school itself. And like Penn State loves to consider itself unrivaled, it doesn't have a rivalry game protected. Iowa has a lot of really good rivalries, and it has 3 protected. And I think Hassel kind of made the point that he thinks that's too many. But there's a couple things to remember here. Iowa and Wisconsin and Minnesota all protected one another for basically an entire century. And it got broken up a little bit with legends and leaders, not legends and listeners. And that there was such a backlash from both states, from both programs, that's what really forced the Big Ten, when it decided to go east-west, into making Iowa and Wisconsin kind of a protected rivalry again. And when they started making these discussions over what to do in a non-division structure, how many teams get how many rivals. And Iowa actually put in for maybe 4 at the beginning, hoping for 3. Mm-hmm. And I think Northwestern might have been the other one. Is he Northwestern or Illinois? I can't remember, but I think it was Northwestern. And, other schools put in for multiple rivalries. Some only put in for 1 or whatever. And it came down to 3 for Iowa. And you got to remember, this isn't just a Iowa decision. Iowa can't just say, these are our rivals and we got to play them, because you look at, Minnesota is the 4th most played rivalry in Big Ten history. The history of this rivalry is, I'll match it up with anybody, with hate and vitriol in amazing situations that go on between these two. Iowa and Wisconsin has been really the most competitive rivalry in this part of the upper Midwest for the better part of about 25 years. And both teams are only 2.5 hours apart. It's a rivalry that bidding teams usually with the same principles. And I don't think anybody wanted to see that one go by the wayside. The other one, which is fascinating, is, and this is also, other schools get a choice too here, Chad. And Nebraska only has really one rival, and that's Iowa. And they put a lot of equity in this rivalry, placing it on Black Friday every year. It gets great ratings. 2 teams that you could see the venom and vitriol among the fan bases. They argue over everything. And that's good and healthy when it comes to a rivalry. So it's not just, hey, Iowa, well, we just want these two. I mean, in fact, if it was only two rivals, it would have been Minnesota and Nebraska. If it was only one rival, it would have been Nebraska. That's just the way it would have been. So I like three rivalries because I think they're all competitive series. Minnesota maybe not as much on the field mostly, but it's still, you got Floyd of Rosedale. It's the coolest trophy in sports, in my opinion, at least traveling trophy goes. So I'm all in on the three that Iowa went, or the Big Ten went with. There's, I think, 12 overall. Most teams have 2 or 1. Iowa got 3. What say you, Chad?
Well, I kind of I see both sides of it, so I guess I'm going to probably make points on both ends. I do kind of agree with the idea of that 3 that takes a third of your conference schedule every year, so it does kind of limit the chances to play Oregon, Washington, Ohio State, Michigan more often. So you're not going to see those teams as often, which I guess in some ways is good, but some ways you kind of want to have those opportunities, I think. So not, it doesn't cut into it a ton, but it cuts into it enough where you're not going to play them. You're just not going to play them as often. But you're also not going to play Purdue as often, which is nice. Rutgers as often, Maryland as often. So it's kind of a give and take, I suppose, there. I would say, if you were to cut out one, I would have actually preferred to cut out Wisconsin, not because just because I see all sides of it. Like I see the Nebraska side of it. Like I feel like that Iowa is the rival that they want. And then I feel like the Minnesota one, you can't get rid of for me as now just because of the trophy almost. So, the Heartland Trophy is a little bit more recent. You would still play them all, whatever, every couple of years, but I don't feel strongly about that. If you had to cut it to 2, I would have actually cut out Wisconsin just for the big picture of it. I will say this, Scott, I feel like the 3 of them collectively, I don't feel like it does damage to your schedule, and I don't think it increases your schedule. I feel like it's a good middle of the road group too, because Nebraska you feel like is probably going to be pretty competitive most years. Wisconsin, absolutely. Minnesota under PJ Fleck definitely will be. Who knows what they'll be in the once he's gone or whatever. But competitively, it does make sense. I feel like it's not like your Maryland and your protected rivals are, I don't know. Okay, that's not a good example. Let's say Purdue and your protected rivals are Indiana, Rutgers, and Maryland or something. Like it's not like you're getting a competitive edge, I guess, in that sense. So I feel like they gave Iowa fair treatment though in this whole deal.
Yeah, I think what the point would be, if it's not like your Penn State and your rivals are Maryland and Rutgers, and then that way you feel like
that was a better example.
Yeah, that you're going to win 90% of those games. With Wisconsin and Iowa, it's been a coin flip. Nebraska has had a down decade, no question, but they have the infrastructure and in place to be a competitive program. And Minnesota and Iowa's had a lot of really competitive games and a history that is really interwoven into the fabric of Big Ten and college football history. So I think keeping all 3 of these is vital to doing this. And then you look around the Big Ten. Wisconsin wanted to keep Iowa as badly as Iowa wanted to keep Wisconsin. Minnesota wanted to keep both, and they got both. Illinois not only has Northwestern protected, but Purdue. And Purdue is only, 90 miles away from Illinois' campus, and same thing for Purdue on the other side. And they just felt like that was an advantage for them to keep that rivalry, because people will be like, well, why are you guys playing them? Well, it is. It's an hour and a half drive. And for them, that makes sense. Indiana, Purdue, a historic rival. Michigan gets Michigan State and Ohio State. The one that got left out that I think you could probably argue a little bit was Michigan State, Penn State. And but neither side thought of the other as a rival. They thought of each other as a really quality opponent, probably the way Iowa feels about both those programs year in and year out.
Right.
So I understand the strangeness of the of the sequence of who you play when, but Iowa still will play every team twice over a 5-year period, home and away. And the frequency of that would only be increased by 1 or 2 games for other opponents. And the thing with me is there's so much change in college football, to be able to rely on those games that matter to your fans, that you can drive to, that and you respect every single year, and kind of are a gut punch when you lose, then that's a big thing too. And then you throw in Iowa State, that one you can have a much more vigorous debate in certain parts of the state for sure. Where you live, Chad, it's probably a debate that why would you even bring that topic up, versus on this side of the state where you grew up, it's more like, it's just another one of the great rivalries. It's not any bigger, but I know in central Iowa, because both sides, you live next to each other, you go to church together, you have kids go to school together, you work next to each other, that you see everybody every single day, and that you got to respect that too. So, I guess I like the idea of having those 4 teams on your schedule every year, because they matter, not only because they're trophy games, because other than Floyd, you can get rid of the other trophies, but those are impactful series that matter.
Sure. Yeah. I guess if it was like the Bears and you just went to one big division, you'd want to play the Packers and Vikings at least every year.
Yeah.
And maybe the Lions. So,
and the Lions, yeah.
So maybe 3. Anyway, good segment there. We want to jump into our mailbag portion, which is going to be awesome. Ask us anything. But first, I want to take a minute to give thanks to our presenting sponsor of Legends and Listeners, GameDay Men's Health. GameDay Men's Health has been awesome so far. Fellas, it is time to get yourself back in the game with GameDay Men's Health. That includes testosterone replacement therapy. Low T is very common in men as we age. You've heard the Taylor Swift song, 22. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling 22. Well, GameDay can make that a reality where you feel like you're in your 20s again. TRT is great for improving your mood, overall well-being, muscle mass, strength, sexual performance, energy, your mental aptitude. They can also help with weight loss. Get started with a free private, no obligation consultation. Scott, I've had so many people just ask me about it, like a little bit, and just my experiences with that. And so there's a lot of interest out there. So the best way to do it is just to give them a call, either call the Ankeny location, West Des Moines location, or North Liberty location, and just see if it's a good fit for you. It's really no pressure, no hassle, no awkwardness. And it's more common than you think. So thanks to them.
Absolutely. I mean, low T is something that we all experience as we get older. And you said 22, that doesn't surprise me as much as you exercise and get about. And I'm starting to get back maybe to 42. Let's see if I can get to 30 at some point in my life. That would be something I would be happy about.
All right, man. Well, we did a little shout out for questions. And we got some great ones. So what we're going to do here is Scott's going to take one. I'm going to take one, vice versa. We're going to kind of rotate, take as many as we can, try to pick our favorite ones until we hit about the 50-minute mark, something like that on the pod. I'll start, Scott, and then you go next. Got this one from Drew on X regarding something we talked about last week. He says, Scott argued that a CFP game at Kinnick would immediately become the most important game in Iowa history. He agrees. Then he asks, would any past games at Kinnick be comparable regarding AKA buzz around the state, game day hype, in-game environment, difficulty getting in and out of Iowa City, etc.? Great question, Drew. Mm-hmm. Scott, I'll let you kick off first. I wonder if we're going to have the same answer.
I think we will. So I'm going to give a passing mention to the one that I think you'll take, and then I'll give another one that's probably from a little different era. 2021 Penn State.
Yep, that's the one. Yep.
Yeah. And I'll let you kind of go into more detail with that. But the buzz was palpable. The whole day environment was the same way. 2 top 5 teams. I mean, that is legitimately what a playoff atmosphere is. But I will say ramped up importance to where it was a white knuckle ride and everybody knew it. It was just like this tunnel vision mindset from the teams to the fans. 2010 Iowa, Wisconsin. Everybody knew that game mattered. Because going back to the rivalry discussion, everybody knew they weren't going to play for the next 2 years. And you had 2 teams at the height of their strength as a program. Iowa had won, I don't know, I mean, the year before they went to the Orange Bowl and was 11-2. I think they're 5-1 at that point. Wisconsin had just come off beating number 1 Ohio State. This was the last year of divisionless football in the Big Ten until now, I guess, but they didn't have a championship game then. But everybody knew it was at stake, and you had 30 NFL draft picks participate in that game. 5 first-rounders. You had J.J. Watt. You had Adrian Claiborne, and you had the list goes on and on, back and forth. And then, of course, the game itself hit the same way, where you had 8 different lead changes, humongous swing plays, the loudest that a lot of fans have said, and I probably agree, the loudest eruption we ever heard was Brett Greenwood's interception of Scott Tolzien when it was 27-24 in the fourth quarter. And it ended up turning into, unfortunately for Iowa, a field goal. And then the next series was when Brad Nortman had his fake punt. And then you had, you think about the last play, Monte Ball, 80 touchdowns in his career, stretching over the goal line, getting popped by Micah Hyde and Tyler Sasht. And the ball pops out. And Monte Ball was like, I asked him the next year about it. And he's like, you know what? If that would have been ruled a fumble, I don't think I ever would have played again. I think I would have been sat on the bench. And at first he was ruled down, and then he was ruled, he crossed the goal line before he stretched over. So I would say at Kinnick Stadium that one had as much impact as anything else.
Good answer. Yeah, I remember where I was. I was living in Washington, D.C. area at the time. I definitely remember that game, watching it with a ton of Iowa fans. That was one of those games where people melted down. That was why it was such a big game. It was so huge, and just the way Iowa lost too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, the flip side of that is the Penn State game in 2021. So I didn't experience the 2010 game in person, but I don't think, like, you may say, oh, okay, this is recency bias, but obviously, we're coming at this from, we're about age 50. So, we can't go all the way back, but there's so much more like attention and hype and everything now. Like, I feel like it's this era ish that, yes, 85 Iowa, Michigan for sure. I was a kid. My parents went to the game. I know that. And that was exciting. That had to be amazing too. I'm sure it was. Yeah. So we'd probably have to be a little older to speak to that specifically. But the Penn State game, it was just all day. It was constant. It was from the kick. Early in the game, Justin Jacobs gets a pick inside the Penn State red zone. And it was off, and then you get behind and then you come back. And then to me, what the two things that really stand out from that game is the crowd creating 3 straight false starts. Just unbelievable. Like it. And the Penn State linemen, yelling at each other in the huddle, like, come on, they're just like, what's going on? We can't even snap the ball. You're just moving back. And then, of course, the Spencer Petras to Nico Regaini touchdown pass was just probably one of the best moments of Brian Ferentz's play calling career, and certainly kind of went downhill after that for the whole offense. But that moment, just so euphoric to win a game like that the way they did, and just the whole – and it was – that was the Caden Proctor visit too, right? Didn't he visit that weekend?
No, Xavier Wampa.
Okay. Wampa. Sorry about that. Sorry. Yeah. So I knew there was a big recruit in town. So you just throw that all together, and there's your 5-star that commits, all that. So great question, Drew. And Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, Caleb Johnson was there too. He was, and then he committed from Cal to become a running back in Iowa. So it was pretty much paid off royally for the Hawkeyes there. It was a weird day for me because in the morning, my grandfather died, and then a couple hours later, a motorcycle ran into the back of my car on the way to there and just destroyed the bike. And it was just like, oh wow, God, what kind of game is this going to be?
What a day,
yeah. All right, Chad, from Jeremy. If there is only one major college football program in the state of Iowa for the past 25 years, what does that program accomplish with Ferentz at the helm?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I think the gist of where this question's coming from is if it's like a Nebraska situation where you kind of feel like you can maybe get the best of the state. Now, Iowa does a really good job of that already. I don't want to say dominates in-state recruiting, but probably gets 75, 80% of the best players, maybe somewhere in that range. Is that fair?
Yeah, other than the best player in the state every year.
Yeah, that's
who
true.
goes to an SEC team. But
and you wouldn't have gotten him anyway. So
yeah.
I hesitate to say they would have done much better, honestly, just because I feel like, as they've said time and time again, like, it's not, the program's not necessarily for everybody. So it's just kind of it's kind of what you accept with Ferentz. You sort of get a pretty high low bar, like your low bar is much higher,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like the ceiling, because you're just not getting those 5 stars. You're not, and that's just not and I feel like it's smart. Okay. So I feel like they know where their bread and butter is. Like, why waste recruiting resources on going after all the 5 stars? We've seen like Nebraska try that under Frost, Minnesota. I don't know. Like, there's a lot of programs that like, we're going to shoot for the fences, and then they kind of strike out, and then you're like, oh, like, what's your fallback plan? Like, Iowa really hits that, high 3-star, probably should be a 4-star type of guys, and they just zero in on those guys. And I feel like they've maximized about what they can do in recruiting. Now, I could say on-field performance, I wish for better offensive numbers, philosophy, all that stuff, but I don't know if being the only program in the state would have fixed that. So I guess I would hesitate to say much better than what they've experienced over 25 years. How about you?
I'm in the same boat with you right now for the past 25 years, because to imply that means that they would have taken the top or a lot of the prospects that Iowa State has or had. And I'm not so sure that they would have gotten most of those, because up until Matt Campbell, it was kind of this unwritten rule in some ways. Like, if Iowa wants a guy, it gets the guy. If Iowa State wants the guy, generally gets the guy. Maybe Alan Lazard is the one that stands out that maybe could, but he might not have gone to Iowa anyway. I mean, he might have gone somewhere else, Notre Dame or something like that. So I don't know that there are many players in the state that would have, accomplished that they couldn't have had already. I mean, the one player that was the complete whiff would have been somebody trying to tee off on a tee and missing all the way around, was David Johnson from Clinton, who they tried to gray shirt, and then he ends up going to UNI. And I think back to 14, if they have that guy running, then that team probably is in a much different position.
That position was sorely needed that year.
Yeah. But I would say it's probably more relevant to this question is for the next 25 years.
Fair.
Because Iowa State is in heavy competition, especially in central Iowa for recruits. And the state of Iowa has much better recruits now than it did 15 years ago, that it's deeper. It's
quarterbacks.
Legitimate. Yeah. I mean, so I don't know that they might have won a couple of more games, maybe one more game here, one more game there, but I don't see them doing much. I'm in agreement with you on this one.
Yeah, good analysis there, Scott. Let's go to Hawkeye Sanity on X. This is a good question, and I would be curious your answer. Which would surprise you more, Scott, if Iowa basketball was top 65 in defense next season, or if Iowa football was top 40 in offense?
No, easily the top 40. That's something that I don't think we're going to see, again. I mean, maybe once in the future. I think Iowa's only fit in that in the last 15 years, and I don't think it has.
Maybe. What if we flip the numbers? Scott?
Top
65 in football or top 40 defense in basketball?
Oh,
that wasn't his question, but let's flip it. Yeah,
right. That gets a lot more difficult.
Yeah,
judged on who they have on the team, I probably would go basketball on that one, just because they had some success when they had Aaron White and Jared Utoff. They were a defensive team, and Adam Woodbury, and Anthony Clemens. As far as defensively goes, they did have a nice little run there of defense in the early part of the last decade, but I can't see either happening. Flip the numbers or whatever, but I would probably be more surprised if I ended up with a top 40 defense in basketball. Now, top 40 defense or offense in football, no way. Not this year. Maybe in a couple of years. So, what about you?
Well, certainly the question. My answer would definitely be it would surprise me more to have the top 40 offense. I don't think that that's happened since I don't even know when the last time Iowa was top 40 in offense under Ferentz. For some perspective, Scott, if we did the 65 in football, Maryland was 65th in the country last year in total offense at 387 per game total yardage. I feel like that's not that outlandish. I don't think that's crazy. 40th in the country is for 18.9 yards per game. That's a bigger jump. So that would be kind of what you need for top 40 offense. Iowa went, what was it like? Oh, man. It was a long time between 400-yard games. They finally hit it last year against somebody.
It was Rutgers,
maybe? Yeah, Rutgers. Mm-hmm. And then the previous time had been Maryland, at Maryland, the Friday night game in 21 was the last time before that. So whatever that span was, 30 games, something like that. I don't know. Maybe it was close to that.
Yeah.
And so, and that's just for one game of 400 yards. So there was a lot of 150s in there, 170s. So
66.
Yeah, right. So if you could just if you could just kind of X out those, get rid of those types of games under Tim Lester, get rid of those really garbage offensive performance games, and just, at least get 250 as your worst game, something like that, then I think you can. I think top 65 in football is possible. Now, Iowa has been top 30 in defense 2 or 3 times under Fran in Ken Palm defense. But that was with Adam Woodbury. So, so that's you just don't have anybody like that. You don't have that 7-foot beast in the middle, who is a defensive guy. So
right, that was in 15 when you had Aaron White and you had Woodbury and you had Jared Utoff and you had Clemens was good on ball.
Gazelle was not horrible.
Gazelle was a good on ball defender. So you had some good defenses then, and they were allowing 63 points a game. Their offense wasn't that great, but their defense was pretty good. They were competitive there, and I mean, to me, I think with football, shoot for top 80. I mean, legitimately, I think that's I don't know where to go any higher than that, but
80th would be 365 yards per game last year, and Iowa State was 81st. Yeah, just to give you an idea.
That still seems pretty high. I saw last year. All right, from Damon, if you guys could give one Iowa football player a do-over in their Iowa career, who would it be? I'm thinking a guy who didn't pan out for whatever reason. Could be injuries, personal reasons, legal reasons, whatever.
You want me to go first? I thought about this. I saw this question. I guess I would go. Who do you think out of these two, Marcus Coker or Brandon Weger? Those are the two of the guys that came to mind early. Just sort of they started their careers with a bang, but just it didn't pan out. Two guys that really could have helped. Honestly, thinking about the era that they both kind of exited, if either one had stuck around, that would have really been big for the Hawkeyes. And, 2012, potentially for Coker, 13. Weger. Did Weger play in 10? Or
no.
Was he just 9? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Left the team, got into issues. And
that's what I mean. Both guys were supremely talented and just didn't pan out. So those are the two guys that popped into my mind. How about you?
Yeah, a couple of that did for me. One would have been, there's 3 actually, and they're all in kind of an older era. Jermel Lewis as a running back was really gifted. Would have been tremendous had he been healthy.
Good one.
Dominique Douglas as a receiver, if he didn't have significant legal issues, had a great freshman year, could have been a really good player. But the one I'm going to pick actually is from that same era, and it's Dace Richardson. Had serious knee injuries. That he was a 5-star. He was, I mean, when you look at left tackle NFL, he was the guy. I mean, he could do it all. He was, kind of slender, but he can move. But he's physical. He had it all, and knee injuries sidelined him for a couple of years. And I would have really liked to have seen him play left tackle, especially in that period from 05 to 09, where he finally got to play in 09 and was sort of healthy enough to actually be a guard. And then he broke his leg mid-season. And it was just like, God, what a terrible thing to have happen. But he would have been an NFL left tackle. In my opinion, he would have been an NFL left tackle all day and night, 10 years for sure.
That's a good one. I'm glad we had a little bit different perspective on that one. My turn, right?
Yeah.
This one's from Austin Hames, Scott. A little bit more of a today's era question. He says, what are the implications for schools paying players directly? Where does that money come from? Will the gap from the Big Two conferences widen even more drastically? Will schools need to cut sports to pay for it? Seems like huge changes are on the horizon. Very good question, Austin. Scott, you're our national reporter here. So let's start with you.
All right, let's presume that the House settlement allows for this to happen. And basically you get to pay 20% of the average of a Power 4 program's revenue over X number of years, and that we'll call it $20 million just to make it easy. That money comes from the athletics department. So now they will use the money that's been raised through the collectives. Many of the collectives will just fold in under the umbrella of the athletics department and be able to use that money. So now other places will maintain their collective because you probably will need some, outside intervention and to help get a player or two, and then also work, because some players won't want to sign away their rights, that they can get more money, doing things. And that those are things that I think still need to be addressed. But when you're talking about, finding $20 million, that's not a rounding error. That's not something that we can just, we have a bag of cash here in the corner in Beth Getz's office that Gary Barta left behind. I mean, it's, you gotta maintain that. Now, their jump will be significant from Big Ten coffers this year, probably in the neighborhood of about $13 million. And if you're going to use largely that plus, some of the, savings on certain things, you probably be okay. But I think the combination, Chad, of having money that you allocate, the money plus the scholarship issue is going to be really, once the roster limits are set, that's going to be where the issue lies. And that's where I think sports can be cut. In Iowa, they may be kind of safe until the scholarship situation comes up. Then it's like, if you can fully fund 105 scholarships for football, you're going to try to do it the way you can, as many as you can. And so therefore, where do you get those other 20 scholarships? Then you're going to have to get them from another men's sport or add them on the women's side. And I don't think adding is what most programs are in the spot to do. And by the way, we can sideline the hockey talk for forever.
Yeah.
I think that's over. Any kind of fun hockey discussion is over. But yeah, I do think that some sports are vulnerable, and the ones that scare me the most would probably be nationally Big Ten wise wrestling, because that's a 9.9 scholarship sport right now, and you got to get chunks, not just divots. And the other one, probably like in an Iowa, might be baseball, because again, you can't nickel and dime your way to getting that equality. And maybe you can compensate by bulking up women's wrestling or something like that, but it's still, you're talking about a 20 scholarship jump or something like that. That's significant.
I'll kind of tackle this other part of Austin's question, which is, will the gap of the Big Two from the Big Two conferences widen even more dramatically? And my general thought is, and see if you disagree with me here, but I think yes, because these schools will have in general, like Texas A&M, for example. I mean, these schools are going to have the collectives to pile onto that. And I mean, Jamie Pollard, for example, at Iowa State has said, I don't know if we can come up with 20 million. You know, that's like, just because it's allowed doesn't mean you can find that money. If you're not, getting the TV revenues that the Big Ten and SEC are getting, especially the Big Ten. So I do think that it's almost going to become like I don't want to say like everyone else, like a mid-major, but it's like if you're a top prospect, you would think, well, I'm going to start with the Big Ten and SEC schools because that's where I'm going to get paid the most. And now they're geographically all over, so it's not like you have to, it's not so much regional anymore. So a kid from California might not mind playing in the Big Ten as much. So hey, I can come home and play at least once a year over in LA or whatever. It's just. So I do see that widening, maybe a little, maybe not dramatically, but certainly I think that's very possible, especially with the quality of programs that like the Big Ten added.
That part is going to be interesting over the long haul. I think the majority of SEC and Big Ten programs already are at or near the top of the list when it comes to recruiting. And so there's going to be some schools that they're going to be kind of bellwethers nationally just to see how things tip. Notre Dame, Florida State, Clemson, probably Utah, just to see how do they recruit versus how they used to recruit with this age of the Big Ten. Now they'll be able to maintain and keep up financially probably in football, but competitive situations, Iowa versus Iowa State, Louisville versus Kentucky, schools that have somewhat similar tier status, that's where you're going to see some of this. And then of course, if Iowa can pay 20 million and Iowa State can only pay 5 or 6, you're going to see a significant change in the two. And then the gap doesn't bridge because the Big Ten's media rights deal really escalates and jumps up. So
do we think Iowa will be able to pay this 20 million annually, Scott? Do we have a good feel on that?
I think they'll come close, especially now with the jump in Big Ten rights revenues.
That's what I was thinking.
And
there's really not a press other than Carver,
Yeah.
which they can table. Not a pressing facility issue right now.
Right.
Doesn't feel like,
Well, exactly. I mean, you look at Carver. Would you like to improve it? Yes, it needs to be improved. We all know that. And that's something that they could tackle in any given time. But all those facility issues back in the past, that's gone. The facility boom is gone because now it's about, because that's all you could do. You couldn't pay the players. So then you gave them nicer looking lockers and, fountains with, candy bars and all kinds of stuff, that now it's like, you've got to be, all they care about is the bottom line. That's fine. That's the way it is in the NFL. I mean,
and I think Beth gets it. I do. So anyway,
Beth gets it.
Yeah. I think it's your turn, right?
Yeah, it's my turn to read to you here. Okay. So, along those lines, Chad, let's go to this one here from Ryan. How big of a discussion hot topic do you think team strength of schedule will be in this year's CFP? With super conferences and no divisions, it's inevitable that some teams will have much easier schedules than others within big conferences.
Yeah, I think strength of schedule is going to be huge. We've talked about the last couple of weeks about, if Iowa goes 10-2, how is that 10-2 viewed when you're hovering in that 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 range for the 12-team college football playoff? And we don't know. But if Iowa's schedule had Michigan and Penn State on it, and then they went 10-2, I'd be like, oh yeah, they're definitely getting in. But this year, I would say that maybe not. It'd be close, probably pretty close. So definitely, I feel like the strength of schedule will come into play. First year of the 12-team playoff, I don't know. I could see the committee trying to be more, I don't know, inclusive, I guess you should say, not make it all Big Ten SEC like the first year, not trying to set that precedent just because that's human nature. You're like, let's get 2 Big 12 teams. Let's get, Notre Dame, you're going to maybe 3 SEC, 4 Big Ten, vice versa. I don't know. I feel like it's going to be, I just can't wait to see how this unfolds. What do you think, Scott?
I think the blind resumes are going to matter a lot. And when you look, it's not just going to be SEC versus Big Ten versus Pac-12 or Big 12. It's going to be Big Ten versus Big Ten. I look at, say, Iowa versus Penn State.
Right.
They don't play each other. They both play Ohio State. They both play certain teams in the West Coast, Iowa, Washington, USC for Penn State. Both play Wisconsin. If they both end up 10-2, then it's going to be a matter of, okay, who did you play? How did you play them? Who beat who? Because it could be the difference between who's ranked 11th and who's ranked 13th. And that's going to be really important. And how do you decide? Well, then you start to parse, how did one team perform against another? Like I went to Ohio State versus Ohio State going to Happy Valley, and maybe Penn State loses by 10, Iowa loses by 14. Which one's, it's going to be really tough. And then you start throwing in the SEC, and then you start throwing in, hey, this one team, there was 2 teams from the Big 12, and they both ended up regular season 11-1. And how does the Big 12 match up with the Big 10 versus the SEC? It's going to be really a hot topic for teams, because you're already going to have 5 teams guaranteed, and 4 of which will get buys, but they're not necessarily in the top 12. I mean, the top group of 5 team could be 16, 20, something like that. Maybe even the Big 12 champion could be the 10-2 team beating the 12-0 team. And how does that figure into it? So it's going to be really intense, I think, come late November, and it's going to be way more intense than what we see on the basketball side going into Selection Sunday.
Yeah, good answer. I do think like it kind of maybe. I think the reality is there's going to also be a little bit of weight. They're not going to say this, but given to what creates the best TV show, the TV ratings, the matchups, like they're not going to say that. But if it's, heck, we saw it in the playoff last year. Alabama got in. Alabama got in over Florida State, and if Iowa's going up against, let's say, Alabama for that last spot, I wouldn't be surprised if Alabama got it, because they're going to draw more TV ratings, and it's just the reality. It is. I'm not saying they'll ever articulate that, but that's going to be part of it too.
Yeah, blue bloods you kind of give them a plus point on some of these things, an asterisk attached. Last year's was a little different since they beat Georgia in the SEC championship. They lost to Texas, which was another playoff team. And then Florida State's situation with Jordan Travis going out and their offense looking comparable to Iowa's really impacted.
That's what I'm saying. Like it would have been a bad TV product.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they just weren't one of the 4 best teams in the country at that point because of Jordan Travis's injury.
Right.
If you have, look at Iowa's situation. They were started at a much lower spot, but still, you just can't. We wouldn't want to have that one either.
Right. All right. One of the reasons we're bringing this mailbag pod is because of our offsetting vacations, and vacation is one of many great occasions to purchase a bottle and then pour a glass of Steeple Ridge bourbon. Steeple Ridge delivers a high-quality, delicious drinking, award-winning craft bourbon. If you don't find Steeple Ridge at your favorite retailer, ask for it by name. Steeple Ridge bourbon is distilled, aged, and bottled in Iowa by Lonely Oak Distillery. Thank you so much to them as well. You start with the healthy stuff, and then you just treat yourself with a glass of bourbons.
Yeah,
with GameDay, and then you got it all if you're a dude. So let's go to. Oh man, I got to pick. There's a couple good ones here. Let's kind of go. I've got 2 more I definitely want to read.
Okay.
Let's start with a football one. Actually, I got 3 more. Let's start with Corey Robert Clark. He says, is Iowa's defense overrated? Is it possible opponents throttle back their game knowing there is no threat from our offense? Is it possible the statistics for the defense look better because opposing teams try to minimize mistakes while also retaining possession of the football? Scott, I have an opinion on this. What do you think?
Yes. And I hate to admit it, but it's true. I think Iowa's defense is outstanding. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's a bad defense at all. But I think one of the things we saw last year was the big 10 West was really bad offensively. And so when you're really bad offensively and you're going against a very, very good defense in Iowa, then it makes Iowa look better. And it did. I mean, name a good defense or offense that Iowa played in the division, or even Iowa State at that point. There weren't any. But you also look at Iowa, the way that played against Michigan, and it was pretty damn good. Not as much against Tennessee, but that was self-inflicted on the offensive side of things. So Iowa was a top 3 to 4 team in just about every major category last year. That's probably a little high, maybe a little overrated. But I also will flip it around and say they're probably a top 10 defense if they played a better team here and there, or offense here and there. And then also where they do get some points is they didn't have to play their own offense, because then they would have really padded the stats.
Yeah, good point. Really good point. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been kind of trying to articulate that a little bit at this point. It was a great question because, I think teams especially last year, really dialed it back, knowing that Iowa's only path to victory last year was creating a defensive big play turnover and turning that into a touchdown or a special teams touchdown. And teams just weren't going to make those mistakes last year, so they dialed it back a lot. I feel like, the Penn State game is somewhat of an example of that. They just played it very safe, very, they just picked off 5 yards at a time. They ran 97 plays, didn't commit a turnover, and beat Iowa 31-0. And so I'm not going to, definitely not going to say Iowa's defense is overrated, but I do think that let's see some more turnover creation this year. Let's see more from the offense and put a little pressure on the other team's offense. I think that's the part. I think that's where you blame the offense more. So is you got to put pressure on those teams to take chances against your defense, because that's where the Phil Parker defense really cashes in. When you got to, try to throw against that light box, and you've got defensive backs' eyes all over your quarterback, and they know where you're going to be, and that's tough, especially if you can get a little pass rush. So, and that just didn't happen last year. So, good question there, Corey, and I think we both agree. So go ahead, Scott.
All right, this one's from Jesse. He communicates a lot with me for sure, and probably you on Twitter. And I like Jesse. I met him in person once, but it seems Iowa will lose a lot of players after this 2024 season, and will have a tough 25 schedule. Which players need to make the biggest jumps this season for you to have confidence in 2025?
They are going to lose a lot. They're going to lose a lot. I guess you'd have to probably start at the receiver position. I mean, you got to do, you got to have, if you can get some good receiver play, get confidence that, let's say, a guy you mentioned last week, a Jarrett Bowie is going to be a guy next year. Caleb Brown, if he could, be a threat in the passing game, give that Tim Lester offense with Brendan Sullivan presumably at quarterback, hey, maybe the offense can kind of carry the team a little bit next year. Not carry, but be on par in this 3-phase situation. I think it's the skill position guys on offense is where I would need to see some progress. And all of a sudden, it sounds like there's an airplane, Scott, over.
Our air conditioning kicked on. So
okay, all right.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I do feel it does remind you that this year is a big one.
I would probably say, just for the sake of differences, is I want to see Jennings Dunker go from being a spoke in the wheel to being the tire, and because he's got one more year after that. But then the scary part is that Iowa has a lot of talent among those guys that can come back, but they'll have options beyond this too in the NFL. A Jennings Dunker, an Aaron Graves, a Xavier Wampa, the running back, Caleb Johnson, so those guys to rely on to take that jump, if they take too good of a jump, they might not be coming back. So, but for the sake of, let's see who all sticks around. I mean, I'll probably say a tie between Jennings Dunker and Aaron Graves. I think if those two can take that step forward, you'll feel pretty good about slotting around them because there are a couple of players that are backups that might be able to step in next to them. And, they might be able to squeeze another year out of somebody like Ethan Herkett. I think he might be one of the last of the COVID guys that has a chance, but otherwise there's a lot of faces there. So,
very good point. All right, Scott, a couple more here before we wrap up. Here's one from No Fall Weddings. Says, what are your thoughts on Caitlin Clark's potential as a future television analyst for basketball games? He says, I think she could carry a broadcast for either men's or women's games. No, absolutely. No question. In fact, I had a friend in town this week and, from out of town. And of course, everyone always wants to talk about Caitlin Clark. And, I think she could be a good coach someday. And I'm thinking she could be good at anything someday. Like she could. And I think, he was talking like maybe she could be like a men's coach, as well. Like I could even see something like that. I don't know. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no question on the analyst thing, Scott. And I know we're getting way down the line here, but it's a fun question to think about. What do you think?
Well, she's 22, so we've got to figure when she's 42 and finally, well, even great players still want to play when they're 42. They don't get on the top 20 of the All-Star ballot, but when she's 42, what is she going to do? Frankly, I think she could be an analyst right now, doing the Olympic coverage. She's just so well articulate, well spoken. She's the best I've ever seen, among the athletes. At conveying thoughts. A lot of times she says nothing and she means nothing. So she says something that you can put down and you're like, she didn't really say anything. And that's probably pretty good. I don't know about a coach, just simply because I think she's so great as a player that sometimes that message gets lost. She's not necessarily the greatest leader. I think that's a Kate Martin trait, that sometimes it was tougher for players to come along with her, the way like a Michael Jordan, because her talent just superseded theirs. I would say as an analyst, she could step in yesterday and do it and be great at it. But my thoughts on her, Chad, she could be like Niall Kinnick, man. I think she could go in and be a politician. She could go be governor of the state. She could go be CEO of a major business company and stand up there and respond. I think she could be a billionaire, like the first female billionaire athlete of all time. I think that to me is more in her wheelhouse even than being a great analyst, which she can do in her sleep, I think.
Yeah, Leah Boston was doing stuff for Peacock this last year, so obviously there's an opening for something like that. I wonder if she would. I would guess that somebody would approach her about that, but she also has a lot of outside income right now. So who knows what her passions are going to be next off season? But we'll get to that. The Fever are playing better. All right, your turn, Scott.
Yeah, I was going to say either that or if you have a really good one you want to get in, since we're running a little bit low.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've got the one that I got via email. If you want me to hit that one now.
I'll do this one then.
Okay.
So if you became emperor, this is from Jeremy. If you became emperor of college sports, what would you do first?
Yeah, and this is probably, I would already be the emperor, but I would say that I agree with Kirk Ferentz that college football needs a commissioner. I think that would be the first thing I would do, because you need someone to just drive this leadership train a little bit more in a unified direction. We're not just bickering about every single thing all the time.
Yeah. I think this is such a difficult situation because, emperor might imply that I could realign the whole sport or something like that.
Yeah,
but I'm not really going to do that. I've always said that what we've seen with college football is exactly what would have happened if the North didn't win the Civil War, which is we would have seen split up of countries, collections of states, and then overarching type of acquisitions and stuff. I would say that I would try to figure out a way where players can be paid, but not the detriment of others, and try to do it in a way that's above board, and then it's so complicated because of what we got going forward. But that's probably where I would start. And then I would probably split off football from everything else, because I think a governance structure for football would allow, if you were able to do that, Chad, basketball and every other sport could say, we're going to go regional. We're going to, because it makes no sense for women's soccer, instead of going to Illinois and Purdue and Indiana and Northwestern, to have to go out and play Washington and Oregon. It just doesn't. And it's only because of football. And even men's basketball, it's not, there's plenty of great competition in the Midwest. So I would probably split off football from the rest and then say, here's your football element, and keep the conference labeled for that football element. Because, some people, the whole Super League philosophy, that's just not going to fly, because people want to be in the Big Ten. They want to be in the SEC. They do not want other schools joining them unless they invite them. So that's what I would do.
Okay. Yeah, I would also make pass interference rules the same as pros, where it's a spot foul.
Yeah, there you go.
Instead of 15 yards, but those are minor things. All right, let's go to one last question here, Scott, which gives us a fun finish here. It's from Judd. It came via email, and he's a high school counselor here in the state of Iowa. And he asks, "What do you remember most about writing for Voice of the Hawkeyes?" So that got us. So that was my first job. I was actually still in college when I started doing that. And Voice of the Hawkeyes, for those that don't know, was like it was actually a printed magazine, like printed like I don't know, like a tabloid or newspaper, it was a magazine, but it was newspaper print. So it came out weekly, pretty crazy. And it was like, it was a great way to get started because I learned a lot. You had to be very self-reliant. I was also working part-time at the Press Citizen at the time, covering high school sports. That's how I got started in journalism, was answering phones at the Press Citizen in 1991 for $4.25 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And I made $4.25 an hour for quite a while. Didn't give those part-timers raises much back then. And I found this out later, but like my dad, I think went to somebody there and I never said anything. And like, he helped, like, hey, maybe you should give him a raise. And I got bumped to $5.74 an hour. So I was really making the big bucks then, a couple years later. But anyway, yeah, it didn't pay much at all. I worked with Mike Finn, the great Mike Finn, who's I think finally going to retire here pretty soon. He works at Win he covers wrestling, and it was just me and him, and we created this magazine every week. And he had two kids, two kids, family stuff going on. I was just like, plugging away and learning, and he let me make mistakes. I think it was just all good experience, to kind of be thrown into something like that and kind of have to do it all and throw something together every week. Like, I don't know, like our things were like 32 pages. I mean, it was a lot every week, and I was still going to school. So anyway, I just remember, you know what I remember? I remember going, one of the first assignments I had was Iowa at Tulsa football in 1996. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Like Mike made a lot of the road trips, but I took that one. He, for good reason, he probably gave me that one. And I did not expect Iowa to lose that game. And they lost that game. And I was like so sick that trip. I just remember, I was like, oh God, this is not glamorous at all. Sports writing thing. And this sucks. I got to write about this horrible loss and everyone's pissed. This was before Twitter. That memory still sticks out to me. That was one of my very first memories about, and I have no idea what I wrote, but I just remember the trip, and it sucked.
Yeah, sure.
Iowa at Tulsa,
yeah,
and they lost. Anyway, go ahead.
Didn't they play the day of the game too?
I don't remember. God, I don't know.
I want to say
so
that.
Long ago.
Well,
it was a night game. It was a night game. So yeah, probably.
I want to say they flew the day of the game, and that became a thing among many that year. Well, for me, my first start was at the Burlington Hawkeye. I'm from Burlington. I was playing soccer my senior year. I was a backup goalie, but my aunt was a classified ad manager there, and I also was in the high school newspaper for a long time, and decided that's what I wanted to do. And so she got me a part-time gig. And thing was, I had to quit soccer. And the next week, our goalie got shot, so he couldn't play goalie anymore. And I'm like, damn, that was my chance. But it was a gun deal that went bad. There's a lot there
Holy moly,
going on in Burlington.
This
It
took a turn. My
yeah,
God.
it wasn't the safest town in the world, but
Okay.
so I worked there off and on for 5 years while I was going to Western Illinois and Southeastern Community College and taking phone calls and covering games that in retrospect I probably shouldn't have been because they involved some of my friends. But I learned a lot, of course, and learned how to write fast. And my first first full-time job was at the Muscatine Journal for a couple of years, and that was fun and entertaining, and got a lot of life there. And so here I am. But I enjoyed thoroughly. I always recommend younger students should go that route because you learn so much from covering, whether it's high schools or really working hard. Now it's easier to get a path to covering major college sports than it was then. And, because you got to learn, with kids, especially high school kids, you got to learn empathy. You can't just write that, so-and-so's error in the bottom of the seventh inning played at the winning run and Burlington season came to an end. Then you're blaming the kid for a loss. Oh, yeah, that's true. But just wait till your phone rings the next day. Wait till you talk to those players again to find out exactly how you got to write that. So anyway, that's a long time ago, man.
Yeah. Another one of my early memories. I remember this was at the Press Citizen. I remember, so I used to, one of the first, I don't know, I guess you would call it a beat. We had a lot of part-timers back then. I covered Regina baseball. That was one of the first things I did. And I can't remember what year it was, but they made it to the state tournament. They won a game to go to the state tournament. I think it might've been in West Branch. That's my memory. They had good hot dogs, by the way. But I just remember, so we were an afternoon paper back then. And I just remember coming back to the office and I really wanted to do a good job with this because they're going to state, and you're young and you've gotten to know some of the parents by now and the kids. You want this to be, you want it to be a good article. I just remember I was there forever. And then one of the editors there was like, what are you still doing here? You got to wrap this up. And it was getting to be 4 a.m. It was I was really struggling with it. And that was just one of those things. I was just still learning, how to write fast and how to write a big thing fast. I just didn't have that skill at that point. So it doesn't come automatically. And nowadays, Scott, we're writing, writing a big Iowa Penn State column, in 2021 in 45 minutes, you got to and this much bigger deal, than Regina going to state. No offense to that, but
to a wider audience, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
To those kids, it's as big of a deal as it.
Yeah. But anyway, I don't even know if I wrote a good story or not, but it was, I probably didn't. I was young. I was still probably a teenager or early 20s, but anyway, just you cut your teeth, cut your teeth and figure it out.
You learn mistakes, as you mentioned with Voice of the Hawkeyes. You learn things like you misspell a kid's name. It's personal. And so, because parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, they cut that out. And then when they see that you left the second N off their last name, or you spelled Jenny with a I instead of a Y or something like that, man, you hear it immediately, but it forces you to double check that. And, as opposed to, not now, but, you misspell somebody's name at Iowa, you're not going to get their mom usually. Maybe you do. I don't know. But, it's a different vibe and different. It's not it's removed. But still, it's something that sticks with you. I remember whether it was mistakes or stuff that people didn't like. I remember one, this was actually with the Gazette. I covered a basketball game. It was a district game, and somebody missed a free throw, and I'm trying to figure out what verb makes it the softest because it was really impactful. and I put botched. And I don't know why I wrote it that way, but I just thought now maybe that's, oh my God, I got hammered. And I was like, can't win here.
Oh man, this is fun. What we should probably do this more often, like even like in the heat of a season or something, like get some, pick out 5-6 questions and dig into them. So
Absolutely.
This was a lot of fun. I like going in a lot of different directions. So
I think in August this should happen. We should do this for predictions, and we should do this for, predictions not only for the season, but what do you think out of the certain players? Statistics, that type of thing.
Yeah, that sounds great, Scott. All right, great show for Scott Dochterman. This is Chad Leistikow. See you next time on Legends and Listeners from the Channel Seed Studios, only on the Iowa Everywhere Network.